crud going around, but nothing too bad. Nothing we can't handle.
Cool. We don't have any crud going down around here yet.
Well, the spell was finally broken. And this morning it was 14 degrees with a 30-mile-an-hour wind.
Oh, yuck.
Yeah,
So
and yesterday was 78. So
oh yeah, that'll definitely mess you up.
yeah.
My husband has a friend that lives in Detroit, and he was sending him the whiteout pictures, and the massive car pile up and everything up there. My husband responds with a picture of me sitting out on the back deck reading and in the sunshine. And he gets
Oh,
the
snap.
he gets the response with a whole bunch of middle fingers on a hand. So,
That is pretty
yeah.
funny.
Anyway, all right. We are almost done. We're on chapter 20. Chapter 20, Sunrise, Sunshine, Sunset, Florida and the Texas Connection. We start with a guy's name, Julio Francisco Frank Castro. And he was a well-known terrorist and drug smuggler. His rap sheet shows only one conviction for carrying a weapon in Miami in 1981. That same year, he was charged with 4 counts of importing, delivering, and selling marijuana. But mysteriously, the case got dismissed. 2 years later, in 83, he was indicted for conspiracy and smuggling 425,000 pounds of marijuana into Beaumont, Texas, as a spinoff of DEA's Operation Grouper. Some of Grouper's targets' drug money was laundered through Marvin Warner's Combanks in Florida. These charges against Frank Castro was also dismissed. So does that tell you that he works with the CIA? Yes, it does. From July 83 to January of 84, the same time period in which he was under indictment for drug smuggling, Castro was providing food, weapons, and equipment for a secret military camp for Nicaraguan Contras in the Everglades near Naples, Florida. Castro told FBI agents that he provided food, ammunition, and M14 rifles to the camp. He would go to the camp weekly to take the supplies. He told that to the FBI. Castro also traveled to Costa Rica and met with the infamous John Hall, who also worked with the CIA, and a Contra leader there. Quote, Castro went to Costa Rica in order to assist Rene Carbo and the Cuban exile fighting there, said the FBI report. Castro tried to tell the FBI agents that John Hall, quote, does not work for the CIA but funnels information to them, unquote. The statement is laughable. John Hall not only worked directly for the CIA, he worked for Rob Owens as well, who is the right-hand man to Oliver North in the State Department. More important, according to the CIA's official pronouncements, its primary work is the funneling of information. That's the code word for he's CIA. Perhaps Castro didn't realize that stated purpose when he worked for the CIA as well. Perhaps he perceived its work to be the elimination of foreign politicians it doesn't like, because of course the CIA does that too. The Cuban exile, Frank Castro, was a member of the infamous Brigade 2506, which of course put him in close contact with Felix Rodriguez, that participated in the CIA-supported Bay of Pigs. The head of the National Front for the Liberation of Cuba, Frank Castro, was also a top dog at CORU, which was a Cuban exile terrorist group that was connected to and partly financed by Guillermo Hernandez Cartier. Castro, who owned the Golden Falcon skydiving club in the Florida Everglades, shuttles between Miami and the Dominican Republic, where he lives with his wife, the daughter of an admiral close to the president of the republic. And as I've explained multiple times, the leadership of the Dominican Republic has been in bed with the CIA for a very long time. And it's been used as one of the stop offs and grouping of weapons and drugs going north and south. Frank Castro is a very dangerous individual. He's CIA trained, according to the Assistant U.S. Attorney Daniel Cassidy, who prosecuted some of Castro's associates involved in drug smuggling and control of a bank. In the mid 1970s, when Castro's compatriots, Orlando Bosch and Rolando Otero, was going around blowing up all sorts of things like post offices and passenger airliners, Castro told the Miami Herald, which had CIA people working in it as well, I believe the United States had betrayed the freedom fighters around the world. They trained us to fight, brainwashed us how to fight, and now they put Cuban exiles in jail for what they taught us to do. Unquote. In June of 88, Frank Castro and 5 others were indicted for violating the U.S. Neutrality Act for taking part in a military expedition and enterprise to be carried on from hence against the territory of Nicaragua, a foreign state with whom the United States, at all times mentioned herein, has been and is now at peace. So, in other words, the U.S. government hadn't technically declared a war against Nicaragua. They had just conducted one for years. In announcing the indictment, Assistant U.S. Attorney Mark Snapp said that Castro financed the 60-man training camp near Naples. In defiance, Castro's attorney, Kirk Monroe, said that Castro would provide aid to the Contras again if he was asked. The defendants took the position that they had set up the camp and trained the Contras with the approval of the White House. But the prosecutors claimed the operation was not sanctioned by the Reagan administration. It certainly was sanctioned by the vice president because he was intimately involved in it, as was Donald Gregg, his national security advisor, and his assistant, Felix Rodriguez. The argument was rendered mute and never adjudicated when the judge threw out the charges, ruling that the United States was not technically at peace with Nicaragua at the time, but that the question remained whether Castro used drug money to finance the operations. In May of 21st, 1986, a letter from the chief counsel of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee to the Justice Department detailed allegations that Frank Castro and his associate, Francisco Chains, quote, are said to be partners in seafood business and use business to smuggle cocaine into the United States from Costa Rica. Funds from the cocaine sale said to be used for the purchase of weapons for the Contra, unquote. The information was based on an investigation by the staff of Senator John Kerry, who headed the Senate Subcommittee on Terrorism, Narcotics, and International Operations. This was apparently the only investigation into the allegations, which, of course, all of that is true. Gary Webb's book articulated it in detail. We've already been through that. And it wasn't just seafood business. It specifically was a shrimp company that they used. In Frank Castro's most famous drug smuggling exploit, he was not even charged. He was named as an unindicted co-conspirator in the marijuana smuggling syndicate headed by fellow Cuban exile and CIA contract agent Tony Fernandez. From 77 to 81, Fernandez and his associates smuggled more than $1.5 million of marijuana into the United States from Colombia. In early 1981, Fernandez, known on the streets as La Mentirita, the Little Lie, was arrested and jailed in New Orleans for his smuggling activities. Fernandez made bail with the help of a banker friend. Upon release, he was kidnapped by Frank Castro and taken to Colombia. That was according to Assistant U.S. Secretary or U.S. Attorney Daniel Cassidy. His Colombian suppliers had some questions to ask about payment for the marijuana shipment that had been confiscated by the DEA. Fernandez managed to scrape up the money to satisfy the Colombians, then bounced around Spain, Costa Rica, and finally Brazil. Weird how Spain keeps coming up in this. Where the DEA caught up with him in Brazil. In 1984, he was extradited to the U.S., where he turned state's evidence against his Baker associates and received a 30-year prison sentence. By 1990, La Mentirita was back out on the streets. But all that is just a prologue to this story. In 77, Fernandez wanted to use some of his drug smuggling proceeds to buy a bank in Miami. His Panamanian money launderer, Stephen Sandor Samos, advised against it because it was inevitably going to be scrutinized by bank regulators. This is the same Steve Samos who helped New York mafioso Lawrence Irizzo launder money through offshore companies and who was linked to Amalgamated Commercial Enterprises, which was funneling money and equipment to the Contras. According to an attorney in the case, Samos's grand jury testimony made reference to Nestor Sanchez, who originally told Fernandez about Samos and his services. Samos testified that this Nestor Sanchez was in the film distribution business in Panama. It is not known if this is the same Nestor Sanchez who was Oliver North's associate and the former Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for the Inter-American Affairs during the Iran-Contra. There's a lot of indication that it is. And before that, he was a CIA agent for 30 years. Sanchez was also in Panama during the mid-70s, according to his testimony before the Senate subcommittee that Kerry was running. So he could very well have been that contact with Fernandez, who was a CIA contract agent at the time with Samos, who was setting up offshore companies in Panama at the same time. In his 1988 congressional testimony, Sanchez denied that he had any business relationships in Panama, but he phrased his answer in the present tense. They're known liars, and they know how to lie. They know how to say something that gives you the illusion that what you're asserting is not true without actually lying. They're trained to do that. Sometime in 1976, Fernandez was introduced to a fellow Cuban exile, Jose Alvaro Cruz, then the biggest drug smuggler in Miami. Fernandez went to work for Cruz, who then introduced him to Miami banker Ray Corona. Corona, like Fernandez, hungered after a bank of his own. He was the vice president at Total Bank in Miami, where his father Rafael was the CEO, and his three brothers worked there as well. In the early 60s, the family had moved to Miami from Cuba, where their father had been a banker, which means he was banking for the Mafia, because that was the only money in town, and they controlled everything. Well, them and the CIA. So Corona, Fernandez, and Samos cooked up a scheme to buy a bank. The money would come from Fernandez drug smuggling and would be funneled to Corona through Samos's wife, Alma Robles Shari. The first bank they picked was National Bank of South Florida, which was owned by none other than Guillermo Hernandez Cartier, the same guy that we know was already trafficking money laundered. Hernandez Cartier had managed to defraud the bank into the ground in less than a year, but the comptroller of the currencies office rejected Corona's bid based on questions about his banking experience. Finally, in mid 1978, Corona won permission to buy Sunshine State Bank in Miami. As a down payment, Samos wired him $1.15 million from Fernando's bank account from Panama, Banco de Ibero-America. Later, Fernandez turned more than $1 million in cash over to Corona to consummate the deal. After Fernandez was indicted and then kidnapped to Colombia, he sold his shares in Sunshine to Corona, putting the Coronas in full control of the bank by the middle of 1982. Before the end of the year, federal examiners were expressing concern over their lending practices and insufficient collateral for loans that they were making. Like many of the crooked savings and loan owners, Corona cultivated politicians. One of Sunshine's directors was Howard Gary, the Miami city manager, who borrowed $95,000 from the bank to buy 2 apartment buildings for $85,000. Another stockholder was South Miami Chief of Police, Sal Vincini. And a big borrower was Lazaro Albo, the right-hand man of the former Miami mayor, Maurice Ferré. But the politician who most helped Coronas was Florida Comptroller Gerald Lewis, whose office continually frustrated the efforts of the FDIC to remove the Coronas and shut down the bank. 2 of Lewis's biggest campaign contributors were large borrowers at Sunshine. Lewis also presided over the failure of ESM Government Securities, which was located in Fort Lauderdale. It was ESM that caused the failure of Marvin Warner's home state savings in Ohio and led to the $55 million loss at American Savings in Miami, while it was headed by Warner. Gerald Lewis is Warner's second cousin. So, Gerald Lewis is Florida's comptroller. His cousin was in the failed banking industry whose bank was being used to money launder. And he impeded the investigation into Sunshine Bank because it was money laundering as well and owned by Mafia CIA connected people. This is how all of this gets done. Meanwhile, Ray Corona was living it up. The former Golden Glove boxer bought a white Rolls Royce, a cigarette boat, and a half-length mink coat. He had a Rolex and favored silk suits. He had become addicted to cocaine himself. From October 81 to 84, Corona bought 9 guns while hooked on the drug and then lied on his gun dealer form. In 86, he was convicted of illegally purchasing the guns while addicted to cocaine. Corona may have gotten his cocaine from Willie Falcon, the drug smuggler and partner of Jack Duveau, and Fernando Burbauer. Sunshine State Bank made Falcon and his wife a mortgage loan in 79, and then they renewed it in 84. And although Fernandez apparently never used Sunshine to launder his drug profits, Falcon did, according to the assistant U.S. prosecutor and an attorney who represented Sunshine State Bank. Other Miami attorneys who keeps turning up is Theodore Klein, the attorney for CIA-connected gun dealer Ron Martin, and also, for a while, of Jack Deveau. Klein represented Rafael Corona, Ray's father, in racketeering and money laundering trials. Nothing was going on at Sunshine besides high rolling, fast living, drug smuggling, money laundering, and questionable lending, political bankrolling, and connections to CIA trained Cuban exiles. In addition to all of that, the $100 million bank was doing business with the Mafia, a lot of it. This begins in 1971 when 23-year-old Ray Corona returned to Miami to start his banking career at Miami National Bank. At the time, this bank was controlled by Sam Cohen, an associate of mob financier Meyer Lansky. Cohen was indicted in 71 along with Lansky and a Caesar Palace official, Jerry Gordon, for illegally skimming money from the Flamingo Hotel in Las Vegas. Cohen copped a plea and did 4 months in Club Fed. One of Corona's customers at Miami National was Joseph Klein, the CEO of a company called Kavanaugh Communities Corporation. Kavanaugh, according to the Miami Herald, was a controversial outfit that sold Florida swampland in the 70s and tried unsuccessfully to get a casino built down there. Klein also was connected to organized crime figures in Philadelphia. One of his business deals, Klein bought some property at the Cricket Club in Miami, which was owned by Sam Cohen and Alvin Malnick, another one of Meyer Lansky's proteges. After Corona took over Sunshine Bank, he put Joseph Klein's wife on its board and began to do business with Royale Group Limited. That was the successor company to Klein's Kavanaugh Communities Incorporation. And its new CEO was Leonard Palulo, another mafia associate from Philadelphia. Palulo's ties to organized crime first came to the public attention in 85 when the New Jersey State Commission of Investigation released a report on organized crime in boxing. The report stated, quote, the previous episode described boxing manager Barry Shapiro as being part of a mob-tainted supporting cast for his brother Kenneth Shapiro's financial empire. A similar relationship existed between boxing manager Arthur Palulo, 30, and his brother Leonard, a key organized crime associate in Philadelphia, currently based in Florida. Palulo vehemently denied his connections to organized crime and in 1990 filed a libel suit in federal court in Miami against New Jersey's commission. The New Jersey Commission responded to the suit by denying Palulo's claim that he had no connections to organized crime. The suit was apparently aimed at stopping journalists from printing such statements. As the New Jersey Commission pointed out, the statute of limitation for libel suit had already run out, and regardless, the commission could not be sued for such statements because Palulo himself admitted to a reporter before he filed the suit. In 91, the roof fell in on poor Lenny. First, he got thrown in jail in New Jersey on contempt charges relating to a lawsuit accusing him of stealing $1.75 million from a pension fund of a printing company he controlled. Then he was indicted by a federal grand jury in Philadelphia for cheating American Savings and Loan in Stockton, California, out of $1.6 million out of a loan that he had gotten for $16 million to renovate hotels in Miami Beach. And that's kind of weird when you think about it. Why would you go to Stockton, California to get a loan when you control a whole bunch of savings and loans in Florida, according to the Mafia? A 55-count indictment also charged that Palulo took $114,000 from Royale Group Limited to pay back a personal loan from Philadelphia man by the name of Anthony DiSalvo at the request of two Mafia-linked guys, one of which was Nicodemo Scarfo was the boss of the Philadelphia Mafia. He was currently serving a 60-year prison sentence for racketeering. The other guy, Philip Linetti, was one of Scarfo's underbosses. He was also convicted of racketeering and was cooperating with law enforcement, turning state's evidence. Fred Martins, executive director of the Pennsylvania Crime Commission, told the Wall Street Journal that DeSalvo is a longtime Scarfo associate and that Pulolo is a close associate of Scarfo's. In July 91, Pulolo was convicted of 50 of the 55 counts against him in Philadelphia, including the theft of the $114,000 to repay a loan shark commanded by the Philadelphia Mafia boss, Scarfo. All of these convictions, except for the $114,000 theft, was later overturned on appeals due to technicalities. Before he was jailed on contempt charges, Pulolo was already dodging a couple of bullets regarding banks and savings and loan fraud. He was the vice president of Dominion Bank in Denver when it failed. Although he was never formally charged of any criminal wrongdoing, regulators questioned whether some of his property pledged to Dominion loans had also been pledged to Sunshine State Bank loans. Then in '89, he was indicted for fraud at Savings One and SNL in Ohio. Pulolo and Savings One owner David Friedman, a Houston businessman, was charged with 5 counts of fraud regarding a $145,000 payment to Freeman out of a $1 million loan to a Pululo's company. Pulolo claiming the payment was prepaid interest that was not supposed to go to Freeman. Freeman was convicted and Pulolo was not. Freeman had bought Savings One in '83. Around the same time, Mario Renda and Martin Swimmer were also attempting to buy the savings and loan. Little is known about Freeman in Houston, where his companies were headquartered. Art Leeser, former chief examiner for the Texas Savings and Loan Department, said Friedman was originally from Ohio and connected to Tyrell Barker, the Herman Beebe mobster associate who owned State Savings in Lubbock. Friedman was trying to arrange the purchase by Barker of several other savings and loans around the country. In 1980, Friedman was involved in a scam to sell grain to Iran in violation of the embargo during the Iran hostage crisis. Friedman lost a federal lawsuit over this in New York. Meanwhile, before any of the savings and loan fraud hit the fan, Pulolo and his companies and relatives were borrowing from Sunshine State Bank to the tune of $15 million, making them the single largest borrower at the bank. He was also a director of King Crown Corporation, who owned about 6% of Sunshine. All the other officers and directors of King Crown were members of the Corona family. Also, long after Sunshine Bank was closed and Ray Corona went to jail, one of the Coronas was found working for Pulolo. Needless to say, all of Pululo's loans from Sunshine became delinquent. So he sold Don Pedro Island off the west coast of Florida to the bank for forgiveness of the $2.5 million debt. Plus, Sunshine paid to settle some lawsuits against the Royale Group. In November 1984, when the bank was struggling to stay alive, the Florida State Cabinet voted to buy the island for $6 million as part of the state's Save Our Coast program and provided Sunshine with badly needed capital. And I'm sure that had absolutely nothing to do with Gerald Lewis, except he was involved in the entire purchase. The comptroller guy that blocked the investigation into this nefarious shit several years before. Even after the deal, Pulolo again defaulted on his loans, this time in late '85. The bank was on its last legs. So what did it do? It hired two of the Royale Group's senior executives. Then Palullo and the bank agreed that the bank would take back the collateral for the loans and forgive the debt, and in addition, issue $15 million in bank stock to Royale, which they're also associated with. The bank regulators halted this transaction, pointing out that it would basically wipe out any personal guarantees of which Palullo was on the hook for. Furthermore, the bank would have to fork over another $3.5 million in cash to the guy, Palullo. The collateral in question was some land in Vermont and a 2-acre tract in Atlantic City that Palullo wanted to develop as a casino. To that purpose, Palullo had made an agreement with Resorts International, which was a casino company linked to Meyer Lansky, the mob. Like any good mobster, what Palullo coveted most was a casino of his own. He finally got his wish in '88 when he bought the unfinished dunes in Atlantic City, a project with a very checkered history. The late mob lawyer Morris Schenker had started it and then defaulted on his union pension loan. Schenker sold the project to San Diego developer Jack Bona, one of the select group that borrowed more than $200 million from savings and loans, all of which failed. Bona defaulted on his loans and put the project in bankruptcy. That's where Palullo steps in. By that time, Sunshine State Bank had been closed for 2 years, and Ray Corona was in jail on his 20-year term. After Tony Fernandez and Steve Samos testified against him, for which Samos got immunity from prosecution, and Rafael Corona's 3-year sentence was overturned on appeal. However, before Sunshine State Bank was closed, in the summer of '86, the Coronas and Palullo had fought a hard, protracted battle with the feds to keep it open. The first real trouble occurred in '83 after federal bank examiners found that Sunshine had a high probability of failure and decided to take Coronas out of Sunshine Bank. By January of '84, the state comptroller's office, under Lewis still, intervened and issued a less severe memorandum of understanding that the bank could improve its situation. So he saved it. To bolster the bank's capital and keep it alive, Ray Corona bought the land that the bank headquarters was on and some of the surrounding property, including tracts that Palullo had sold to the bank for a profit of $160,000. And where did the money come to do this? From another bank, People's Savings and Loan in Texas. By February of '84, People's Savings and Loan wired almost $3 million to Sunshine State Bank. At that time, there was no documentation for the loan at People's. There was no loan closing statement. There was no recorded mortgage. There was not even a loan application. All of these omissions are violations of federal statute. The loan was a 6-month loan, which was highly irregular for a small savings and loan of assets with only $129 million. And it was basically being loaned to recapitalize a failed bank in another state, which is the violation of what the savings and loans were for. None of that mattered because it's money laundering. Okay. The loan was paid back 20 days after it was due and 4 months before Ray Corona was indicted for racketeering and money laundering. Corona paid back the loan after he sold the property to South Miami Hospital for a profit of $1 million. Joel Daniel, the managing officer at People's, then said he didn't want to make the loan, but was told he had to do so by the new owners who had taken over just prior to this, just 3 months before the money was wired to Corona. The new owners was Marvin Haas, Haass, from San Antonio, and Jerry Hawley, from Waco. They were construction contractors who also owned some nightclubs and bars in San Antonio, Austin, Waco, and El Paso. Some of the names were Texas Down Under, Doc Holidays, Rocky Raccoon, Abracadabra. Needless to say, they knew nothing about savings and loan. They borrowed the money to buy peoples from another dirty savings and loan, First South Savings in Houston. First South was controlled by two attorneys, one of whom bought a title insurance company with a $20 million loan from San Joaquino Savings. That was brokered by Herman Beebe. And again, Herman Beebe puts money in and then decides who gets to borrow that money. So it's a direct mafia connection. The former Texas Savings and Loan Commissioner, Alvis Vandegrift, became counsel to these attorneys' law firm after he retired and had the distinction of shepherding through the regulatory process Robert Corson's application to take control of one of his savings and loan. So the guy who's supposed to be protecting Texas gets in bed with the Mafia CIA savings and loan scandal and shows everybody how to do it. Haas and Holly are two fairly undistinguished gentlemen whose takeover of Peoples gives them the appearance of either being frontmen or someone like a gopher for People's Savings. Holly ended up being convicted of perjury for statements made during an investigation after Peoples failed itself. Haas apparently escaped any serious legal problems. In a search of the public records in San Antonio, it was revealed that Haas is connected to two very influential entities. One of them is the Longoria family from the Rio Grande Valley, a rich, powerful Mexican-American family. The other is Morris Joffe. After Joffe and his first wife divorced, he married a Longoria. That's a big name in Texas, a big family name. Asked to characterize his relationship with Joffe, Haas replied, "I worked for him. He's been a friend of mine for 30 years." Joel Daniel, the managing officer at Peoples, said Haas and Joffe were supposedly tight. Joffe reportedly financed Haas's nightclub in San Antonio, which Joffe and his family owned. Joffe got his original financing for a mall from Farm and Home Savings, a Missouri savings and loan with connections to Walter Mitchner. But Haas denied that Joffe financed his bar. He said he was just a landlord. In February of '84, the same month Peoples lent $3 million to Ray Corona, a Mitchner allied bank in San Antonio lent $500,000 to Perseus, one of Haas's nightclubs. As collateral for the loan, the nightclub assigned to the bank, Allied American Bank of San Antonio, its interest in a lease with Morris Joffe. Haas did not answer a question about whether People's Savings ever did any business with Joffe. However, Daniel denied that the savings and loan did any business with them, but he acknowledged that there was a fixed-based operation in San Antonio's airport right next to Joffe's, and that People Bank, who financed it, had lost $2 million on the deal. Morris Joffe is a unique individual in Texas, as unique as Walter Mitchner. Joffe could be called the Walter Mitchner of San Antonio. Both men exercised a great deal of political influence, but they do it quietly and behind the scenes. Both were strong supporters of LBJ. Joffe perhaps more than Mitchner. Both are feared and talked about in hushed tones, and both had contacts with Carlos Marcello in New Orleans, the mafia boss. Joffe returned to his native San Antonio after serving as an aircraft engineer in World War II and went in the construction business. He made his first fortune after allegedly discovering uranium in Karnes County, where Mitchner grew up. By flying over it with a newfangled detection device. He managed to sell his leases and options for a big profit. Jaffe also got into the oil business with his buddy Oscar Wyatt, a Texas oilman who went to Iraq with John Conley during the Gulf War to get some Americans home. And John Mecum Sr., the rich Houston oilman whose son, John Mecum Jr., allegedly hobnobbed with mobsters. Jaffe, like Michener, was never too proud to suck off the government teat. In a celebrated incident in 1957, Jaffe got into a dispute with an Air Force colonel at Lackland Air Force Base who wouldn't go along with Jaffe's efforts to get more airmen to frequent his ice skating rink. Jaffe went over the colonel's head and eventually got the base to bus the airmen to his rink over the colonel wing commander. In 1962, Jaffe bought the assets of West Texas conman Billy Sol Estes out of bankruptcy for $7 million to be paid over a 10-year period. However, by 1971, he had only paid $1.3 million on the deal. So the IRS auctioned off the remaining $5.7 million note. And who bought that note? Morris Jaffe, of course, for $200,000. That's crazy. Then in early 1970s, a number of mob connections to Jaffe came out. First, Jaffe claimed that he had been trying to buy Carlos Marcello's Churchill Farms, a 6,400-acre spread in New Orleans. The deal fell apart, and Marcello went to jail in 1970 for assaulting an FBI agent. I'd have served his time for him if he'd have sold me the land, Jaffe said. Key points of the alleged explanation for this deal don't make sense. Churchill Farms was one of Marcello's greatest pride and joys. It's where he went to do a lot of his scheming. He had grandiose plans for it. First, he had gotten the state of Louisiana to put dikes all around the swampland, and then he had the state install huge pumps to drain it. The next thing he wanted was a superhighway going through it, but that was too much even for Louisiana to swallow. That's when Jaffe appeared on the scene wanting to buy the property. Perhaps Marcello figured he'd never be able to get a highway through his property, so he'd just sell it. But perhaps Jaffe was brought in, as one organized crime investigator believes, to front for Marcello so the good state of Louisiana could build the highway in good conscience. But when Marcello's assault conviction made him too hot for Jaffe even. Also, the events leading up to Marcello's assault on the FBI agent did much to blow Marcello's cover. Up until then, he had consistently denied being connected to the Mafia. But in September 1966, Marcello was caught by New York police having lunch at La Stella's restaurant in Queens. Seated at Marcello's table was none other than Carlo Gambino, the boss of the biggest New York Mafia family. Seated next to Marcello's left was Santo Trafficani, the Florida mob boss. Seated directly across from him was Thomas Eboli, acting boss of the Genovese family. And seated next to him was Joseph Colombo, boss of the Colombo family. After being arrested, Marcello returned to New Orleans, where he took a swing at an FBI agent at the airport. In August of 1990, in the Texas Monthly, there was a story about Jaffe's son, Doug, traveling to Romania to drum up capital. Jan Jarboe, a former San Antonio columnist who wrote occasional fluff about the Jaffes, stated that Marcello is known as the little man with a wide-ranging mafia connections. When I first met Morris Jaffe in 1975, I asked him straight out if he was in the Mafia. He laughed so hard he practically fell out of his desk chair. He said, "Hell no." Well, when I read that description of Marcello, one of the richest, most powerful, most feared, and most convicted mafia bosses in the country, I laughed. I laughed even harder when I read Jarboe's question to Jaffe. Of course, Jaffe, whose father was Jewish and mother was Hispanic, isn't in the mafia. Only Sicilians and Italians could be mafia. The questions are what organization, enterprises, businesses, and contracts Jaffe has with the members of the mafia and their associates. So, what do you call the Jewish mob? Is it the mob or the mafia? Because you have the Italian version and you definitely had the Jewish version. One curious business deal Jaffe attempted in 72 was the purchase of King's Castle Hotel and Casino in Lake Tahoe, Nevada. The casino had been owned by Nathan Jacobson, who bought it after he sold his interest in Caesars, where he had been one of the original owners, along with the Rogers brothers from Beaumont. Jacobson bought King's Castle with a loan from a mob controlled Teamsters Union pension fund, but went broke in 72. The pension fund had been fishing around for new owners when Jaffe put his bid in, but he was beaten out. Who bought that casino? Oh, the Pritzkers from Chicago, who hired Burton Cantor as their attorney, who had all of those accounts at Castle Bank, like more than anybody else. Burton Cantor had more accounts at Castle Bank, the CIA bank, than anybody else. He was the attorney for the Pritzkers when they bought the casino. That's crazy. Another mob connection to Jaffe was dug out by journalist Jonathan Kitney. In his book in 1974, The Maldori Murder Case describes the events leading up to a 1970 murder of Molandori III, an Oklahoma rancher. Molandori's sister, Katsy, married John Meekum Jr. Katsy and Mainland Savings Raymond Hill are good friends. Through Jaffe, Meekum had met the loan scam artist and mob associate Leroy Kerwin. Kerwin had earlier gone to jail in a car and bankruptcy scam ran by Chicago Mafia Felix Milwaukee Phil Adoriso, a feared killer and scam artist. Jaffe apparently first encountered Kerwin through a restaurant franchise Jaffe started in the former New York Yankee star Mickey Mantle. Kidney reported that Kerwin went to Chicago to appeal a tax evasion sentence. Jaffe accompanied him to petition the judge on his behalf. I would be willing to stick my neck out to guarantee Mr. Kerwin as I know him. If there was some way I could personally take responsibility, I would do it, Jaffe told the judge. Jaffe hired Kerwin as a special consultant to his insurance company for $1,000 a month. According to Kitney, and then Kerwin used a Jaffe company as a front for loan swindles. Jaffe claimed later that this swindle cost him $250,000 and that he then turned Kerwin into the authorities. Kerwin fled the country and his body would be found in a shallow grave in Canada. He had been shot in the head at close range. No one was ever charged. So he was executed. John Meekum Jr.'s involvement with the mob figures didn't stop with Leroy Kerwin. In testimony before the House Select Committee in 72, Aaron Cohn, the director of New Orleans Metropolitan Crime Commission, stated that Meekum, who owned the New Orleans Saints professional football team, was seen frequently at a New Orleans restaurant called Marcello's. The restaurant that was connected to the Marcellos. The restaurant's name was La Louisiane. It was owned by the Morin brothers, who received financing from the mobster Marcello. Meekum became closely affiliated with the Morin brothers. They frequented the restaurants, they went together on trips. Finally, Cohn stated, I make reference to another astonishing involvement of the president and major owner of the New Orleans Saints. Last month, April 12th, 1972, John Mecum Jr. was a principal in the organization of two corporations in Fort Walton Beach, Florida. Two other principals are a convicted gambler and a developer with ties to Marcello's syndicate. One of the principals was Sam Presley Jr., a notorious gambler sentenced to 1 year in prison for gambling in 1971. The other was Gerald Senner, Senner. He has a considerable record of forming business partnerships with individuals and partners of Carlos Marcello and other major members of his structure, including Roy and Frank Occhipenti. Mecum later sold the Saints to San Antonio and New Orleans car dealer Tom Benson, who, according to a 1985 Comptroller Currency report on Herman Beebe, had purchased Pontchartrain State Bank from Beebe, the mobster. Mecum also owned Warwick Hotel in Houston. When Marcello would come to Houston for his visits, one of his favorite places to stay was Warwick. He would be comped, meaning given free rooms there, by management. That was according to a police criminal intelligence official. Other prominent Mafia figures stayed at the Warwick as well, such as Sam Giancana from Chicago. Another author, Thomas Ross, who worked at the time at the Chicago Sun-Times, said Mecum's father and Joffrey's close friend and partner, John Mecum, was one of the original incorporators of the San Jacinto Fund, which was used by the CIA to launder and funnel money. Mecum Sr. was also very close to the author describes as the CIA asset, George de Morganshield. That George. John Mecum, with all of his mobster ties, was close to George de Morganshield. Just let that sink in a little bit. That's crazy. Totally crazy. So, that's probably, we're going to continue, but I think that's enough for today. This is a good place to break. It's so much. It's so much. I can't believe that this guy survived writing all of this stuff and outing all of these people and putting all these pieces together. And as I've told Alicia, who knows him, I would love, after we're done with this book, to be able to talk to him. Because honestly, I don't know how he survived. There's just so many connections in here to all of our stories. So we're going to stop there. What you got for us, Ron?
Just really interesting about George de Morganshield, and you were talking about the Jewish mafia. Well, I mean, you know, if anybody ever goes back and looks at the JFK assassination, I mean, everything about that was he was on his way to the trademark. That was it was basically, I think it was a Jewish. I'm very careful not to. I'm not one that says it's all the Jews. But you can't really deny the lineage here. Who was the guy who filmed it? Zapruder. I mean, that whole thing. When you factor in what JFK was trying to do with Dimona and restrict the Israeli nuclear program, a lot of connections there as well.
Well, there is clearly. Can you mute? I'm getting a little bit of feedback. There's clearly a Jewish mob, just like there was the Italian mob. There's clearly, I mean, in the book that we were reading about BCCI, and you look at the arrangements and who owned what down in Australia, in the Sydney area where they had set up the R&R hotel, there was clearly a Jewish mafia down there. And Rupert Murdoch was in the middle of it. And, obviously there's lots of that's why, like, what's his name? Jack Ruby changed his name. Rubenstein is his name. He was associated with the Chicago Mafia. And so there is clearly that same Pritzkers. There's a lot of them going around in that same bootleg whiskey, the Brofmans, all of that stuff. There's clearly a link there, regardless of what anybody wants to say.
I agree with you, and I think I don't remember where I heard this, but when Jack Ruby was asked why he did it, why he killed Lee Harvey Oswald, he said he did it for Israel. If I remember correctly, I don't remember where that quote came from, and if I'm wrong, I'll own it. But that just comes to mind.
Yeah, I've never heard that, but I mean, there's clearly that whole backdrop, and that's one of the things that when I first started doing this research, the name changing, when you would go to actually research the names in these books, and they just seem like regular names until you actually look them up, and that name is a derivative of the original name. So, and they all seem to be these people with nefarious backgrounds that did this, as a way of not connecting themselves to something that had happened in a previous era in their family history. So it's just a very interesting observation.
Well, and another thing you said in there, that they were one of those guys that was really close to LBJ, and LBJ was probably the most friendly president up to that point with in connection with Israel. I think he had I think one of his mistresses was a Mossad agent or whatever, and that was right around the time of the Liberty incident. So anyway, I'm not trying to connect too many dots and get off track. It's just interesting. A lot of the stuff you said in terms of Chicago, Texas. This is fascinating.
Yeah, and LBJ is also the only president that I know of that had his own personal assassin, which he did in Texas. And there was a lot of people he was Hillary Clinton before Hillary Clinton. There was a lot of people that knew that LBJ had cheated in the Senate race in Texas, and all of the people mysteriously ended up dead. That's a crazy story. And that guy was protected his whole life. So a lot of interesting stories.
And another, this isn't really ancillary, but LBJ is the one who put in the Johnson Amendment. I want to say it was like 1954, and essentially what that did was that prohibited. It didn't really have a lot of teeth, but it still caused preachers to not necessarily talk about politics from the pulpit. And as soon as all the preachers stopped doing that, that was when you removed prayer from school, you removed Bible reading from school, and then all of a sudden the moral decay of the country just started going off the cliff.
Yeah, not a good guy. Definitely not a good guy. The only way he could have ever become president was the way he became president. And they were in the middle of an investigation of his crimes in Texas at the time of the assassination. There was an entire investigation going on into his assassin's deadly rampage in Texas. It was huge. And that is the rumor that JFK was going to take him off the ticket. And then, in short order, as soon as he became president, all of the investigations were dropped. Stellar, go ahead.
And I'm just shaking my head between all of these ties within the gaming. So that's the laundering, these families, CIA stuff, these entertainers that have been here, that also back to JFK time. I grew up with some of these families, never in my wildest dreams thought anything about it, and it's like just mind blown. And the banks and Texas and all over Florida and holy.
Yeah, I mean, and it's funny because, growing up, I remember these banks. Um, my parents banked at some of these banks, and it's kind of mind-boggling to me that you have all of these, you know, uh, what appears to normal Americans as fairly prestigious banks, and to find out that this amount of banks, I mean, it was hundreds of them, were all owned and operated by Mafia, CIA type people. It's like dumbfounding to me. How in the world, if the federal government was not complicit in this, did all of this stuff happen? Because you could tell, even on the reports that they did, like on Herman Beebe, a lot of the information that's in this book came out of the report that was written at the federal government level. And basically, not a lot of it was ever acted upon. And again, back then, judge shopping is not new. They would get acquitted on certain accounts, or they would cop a plea deal because the DOJ was involved in it as well. Those people that were not indicted, repeatedly not indicted. And no one, Congress, no one ever looked into it. The very few commissions that were ever done, John Kerry's one of them, but it appears now in hindsight that while there was some exposure, there was no accountability in most cases. And if there was any accountability, it was the low hanging fruit, not the primary perpetrators of it. So that's why, after reading as many books as I've had on this, I realized that Congress is theater. It's a kabuki dance. The commissions, the committees that they have, all kabuki dances. And it's the same especially in Florida back then, a lot of corruption, a lot of corruption. The Cuban exile community was very, very big and influential at the time, because if you didn't go along with what they wanted you to, they'd kill you. So there was a lot of corruption in Florida politics back then.
Well, I'm just thinking about some of the families, like you guys are talking about the Jewish mob stuff, and I'm just like linking things together. Like the families, of course they're around here, but when they got in trouble, when there was just too much light on them, they had to go somewhere, and they were still under control. And they all went to, a lot of them did go to Florida and stuff like that. Families that were still here, Southern California. It's just kind of crazy. And the history between Las Vegas, holy cow, it just totally ties in everything, every freaking thing.
It's a small world.
Yeah, and then when you start thinking internationally, the tie-ins with, like Macau and
yes,
Hong Kong,
Bora Bora, all of them.
Exactly.
Yes. Same network. Yeah. Totally incredible. And of course, I think back, I think I've told you guys this story, but the one northern Iraqi guy that was very wealthy, that used to come to all of General Garner's dinners that the northern Iraqis hosted for us, asked me to go on a tour of the world casinos with him. Like to go to Monaco and to Bora Bora. And I'm like, I can't do that. I'm married. He goes, oh, I don't care. Well, I do. It's just like, that's their playground. They're all very at ease there. And another interesting dynamic of this, that they designated locations among themselves, all the different Jewish faction, Italian faction mobs, of designated locations that were free from competition. And I found out that the Warm Springs in Arkansas was one of them. If you go back and you look at the history of that town, it was one of the places they all went. They got along, even if they were in the middle of a war. They all went there together and sat around, jibber jabbered. And there were several of those places that they had designated as like community property where they could all go and have fun in their fun way. Um, but some of them were very odd. Like I couldn't believe one of them was in Arkansas. But of course we know about Arkansas. So in the aftermath, it makes perfect sense, but it didn't at the time.
Colonel, I just posted a book in the pill there, and it's a book by a French author named Laurent Guillaume, and he does a very good and thorough job connecting the JFK assassination with and potentially the RFK assassination with Israeli forces. And I still don't believe that Israel was the only ones that had a hand in that. That was everybody did, I think, because everybody wanted him out of the way. But he does a really good job of connecting that aspect of it. So I put that in the pill.
Thank you. And I find that slightly ironic since we've confirmed that French OAS officers were in Dallas that day. Their version of the Gladio, at least two, by some accounts, three or four, depending on who you read and what your source of information, and that they were the people that were on the grassy knoll that took the shot from the front. And that, there were other assassins there from behind, and that at least two of the shots that hit came from behind, up above. So it was a kill zone. There was no way he was going to make it out of there alive. They had decided that was going to be the deal, and it was the deal. Like I said, I'm of the opinion now, after looking at this. I mean, look at Colombia. You had MI6 there, you had the CIA, and you had the IDF intelligence and some Mossad associated figures in Colombia when they were setting up all of the cocaine triangle at the time. I'm of the opinion that there's not a lot of difference between all of them. The MI6, all of them were modeled off of the MI6 model. They were all set up post World War II, and they all collectively worked together. We have found the CIA working with the KCIA in Korea, the intelligence organization they set up in Iran in the immediate aftermath of the war under the Shah. All of the intelligence agencies that they set up after they overthrew the governments in Latin America, they work as a hive. I don't see a lot of distinction. Do they have some competition based on personality between them? Yes, they do. But at the end of the day, they all work together. The old Saudi government was in bed with the CIA. John Brennan is a perfect example of that. The German BND, the Galen organization, a derivative of the CIA. They picked who was going to be in charge of it. They bought Crypto AG together. They deployed Crypto AG together. So I don't see a lot of difference. In just about every place you see the CIA, there's going to be an MI6 person there as well. Go ahead, Ron.
To your point there, I always kind of like to describe that as it's like there's a Walmart in every town. The Walmart in one town is different. It has a different management structure than the one that's 2 towns over, but they still operate under the same Walmart banner. And I kind of use that as a loose understanding of intel agencies. At all these intel agencies at the very extreme corporate level, they all are on the same team, but each individual store is like the United States CIA or MI6 or KGB or GRU or whatever. And I don't know if that's an accurate, how accurate that is to describe it, but that's generally kind of how I've come to understand it.
Yeah. I don't. I understand that point, and of course, stores that are co-located in the same city, they compete against each other to some extent as far as sales goes and stuff like that. So it's definitely a good example of the internal rivalries in trying to promote one agenda over the other. And do they do some backstabbing things? Yes. James Angleton is probably the best example of that. You won't find anybody else that has two memorials in a foreign country, i.e., Israel. And he was also running the Vatican desk at the same time. And that's where you have all of them being inducted into the Knights of Malta, the Masonic Lodge of P2 that they were associated with. And it's just an interesting web that they have spread around the world. I refer to the entire organization as the world's Praetorian Guard. They are the Praetorian Guard for the international syndicate. At the end of the day, it is the syndicate that decides what's going on and where it's going to go on, and they just carry out the orders.
That was very well put.
Yeah. So anyway, all right. If we don't have any more comments, we're going to go ahead and close up. And let's see, I did a very interesting interview with a podcaster in Malaysia today. Very interesting interview. And I love doing the foreign interviews to get their insight into how they see the world. And I definitely really enjoyed that one. So let's look over. I am going to be on CanCon and show tomorrow. They're at 6 o'clock on Badlands Media. They're reviewing the book that was written by the author, and I don't remember his name off the top of my head. Hold on, I'll get his name. Hold on, just 1 second. Ralph Pizzulo. He's the guy that showed up in that Laura Logan interview, whose dad was throughout Latin America when Operation Condor was going on, that made the comment that his dad used to come home and share all of his news of the day with him, with the CIA Bernhard guy, Bernhardt, whatever his name is. They're reviewing his book that supposedly Patrick Burns paid to have written about, how the CIA isn't the election interference guy. It's all from Venezuela. So they invited me on their show to discuss. I think we're going to go over chapter 4. So he sent me the book. I'm going to participate with him in that for just that chapter tomorrow at 6 o'clock on Badlands Media on Ashes and CanCon show. So advise that.
I'm guessing that's the book Stolen Elections.
Yeah.
Stolen Elections.
Yeah.
I put it in the pill.
Okay. Alpha Warrior show for right now is on for Wednesday night at 9:30. I wouldn't be surprised if that gets canceled, but for now it is. And on New Year's Day, Warhamster and I do plan on doing our noon show. I'll let you know if there's any conflicts with that. I likely will not do a show that day. I will definitely do our, obviously I did Mondays, that's today, Tuesday and Wednesday, and then we will definitely do one on Friday. So that's kind of the schedule.
How is Warhamster doing after his surgery?
He's doing great, according to him. We did the show last week, so, or whenever that was. The last show that we did, since he's
Right.
so he can sit in his chair for an hour, but
Yay.
yeah, but it's about an hour long. That's about as long as he can last right now. So anyway, keep him in your prayers for a speedy recovery. Okay, that's it, guys. Thanks for being here. And I will see you tomorrow at 4. Take care. See you guys tomorrow.